It's a pleasure to have you with us. You are one of the commissioners of the CFTC and have been a very strong voice in this space, talking about many of the issues that are top of mind for people in the industry, whether you are on the private sector side or on the regulator side. And to that role, you bring a really vast experience, both at a counterpart agency, the SEC, through to your work at Treasury, and now at the CFTC for the last year. Since joining the CFTC, and particularly you sponsor the CFTC's Technical Advisory Committee, Technology Advisory Committee, and at the most recent meeting you mentioned that our nation is really at the cusp of exciting and challenging innovative technologies. You talk about building in that context a safe financial system and protecting customers and ensuring financial stability. Why is that a priority for you?
Well, thanks, Caroline. Thanks to Chainalysis. I'm thrilled to be here. The stage is fantastic. I love the color, and thanks for all of you showing up for the 9 a.m. Let me give my standard disclaimer that the views I'm about to give are my own as a commissioner, do not necessarily reflect the views of the commission or my fellow commissioners. So I have spent my entire career, 21 years in the federal government, trying to keep our markets safe, trying to ensure financial stability, trying to protect investors and customers and the market. This is a sizable market, right? This is a very big market that a lot of people are in. So if government doesn't keep pace with technology, it's usually the most vulnerable people who suffer. So we have to find a way to try to ensure that there are customer protections, ensure that there are market integrity guardrails. So I have spent my time at the SEC. Then I moved over to Treasury, where I spent 12 years and became the Special Inspector General over TARP, appointed by President Obama, where I was basically cleaning up after the financial crisis. So if you think about cryptocurrency is born out of the financial crisis, right? And also out of sort of frustration to the bailouts. And so it was of natural interest with me. And I ended up teaching at Georgetown Law and teaching an SEC class more about, that started getting more and more into crypto. And then I developed a cryptocurrency course for the University of Virginia Law School. And was doing that just before I came over to the CFTC. So when we look at, we have people, we have businesses who want to get involved, who already are involved. There's not really an option to not go in and try to add customer protections and try to keep our financial system safe, because it's already in our financial system. And so the question really becomes, I would rather businesses and people be able to do that in the United States through a regulated system that brings some safety, financial stability, customer protections, rather than go offshore, which is still going to introduce risk into our financial system.
Yeah, and I think you make a very good point, because often we hear when people talk about consumer protection that one of the answers to that is, well, just let it burn. But as you say, we already have a very significant number of consumers in this space in the US, and they're not going away. They've made that very clear. They've been in this space for a very long time now. And so that sort of let it burn approach doesn't seem well adapted to the reality of today, and nor does sort of pushing those firms who are interacting with those customers offshore, because you'll lose as a regulator those touch points as well. At the TAC meeting a couple of weeks ago, you really deep dived into DeFi. You talked in particular about accountability, and really also this idea we often talk about in the space when we think about DeFi, about this spectrum of decentralization, and what are some of the indicators of decentralization. From a regulatory perspective, particularly given that background that you've had, why is DeFi interesting, and what makes it challenging?
Yeah, so I think DeFi is very interesting, and I don't think, particularly in Washington, that there's kind kind of a strong knowledge base where everyone's got a great understanding. And part of that is because DeFi is evolving. So, I mean, DeFi is essentially what Satoshi Nakamoto envisioned, right, at its core. But if you think about sort of my background, so I have done a lot of money laundering investigations. I've done a lot of fraud investigations. I've had to trace funds. The idea for me of a transparent, permanent, immutable, traceable public blockchain is pretty intriguing. I mean, you know, I had to trace flow of funds the old-fashioned way, which took a long time and ended up being very difficult. And sometimes you couldn't even get it once it went into certain countries. So you have that, and then you have sort of from a financial regulatory perspective, the idea that you could be able to identify risk in the financial system through use of this public blockchain. So there's a lot of very interesting things that could happen with DeFi. Some of the challenges, right? It's still pretty new. It's growing. It went, I think, from 10 billion to, I think the latest number I saw is 47 billion. But the technology is still, and the industry is still growing and evolving. So the question is, can you get all those benefits at this point until it reaches a significant scale? And in the interim, there are a lot of risks and challenges. The evolution, the newness of the technology is one. The issue of accountability. I mean, for me, the issue of accountability surrounds all of crypto. And when I say accountability, I'm not just talking about regulators, although I am talking about regulators, but I'm also talking about to your customers. I'm also talking about to the public, to the markets, to the financial system. So when you look at DeFi, there's this question that surrounds everyone that comes in to see me or everyone I talk about is like, what is truly decentralized? And that is kind of still up for debate. And so what you see is a lot of times there are players coming in that can introduce centrality, whether it's intended or not. And so it's something to be very conscious of. I mean, so companies will come in, they'll talk to me about, oh, it's fully automated, it's fully smart contract. And I'm like, why are you in here seeing me then? Like, you are a person as part of governance of this company. And so, you know, a lot of it is just not there yet. When we talk about decentralization, a lot of times what we're talking about is governance, is decision-making, but there's also economic decentralization. So these are all the things we have to look at: technological decentralization, economic decentralization, which is an issue that was brought up in tax. So that's one. The issue of privacy is very big here. And so, you know, a lot of people may not want their transactions on a public blockchain. So how do we solve for that while still having compliance with the law? Cybersecurity is a big issue, significant a number of hacks and code exploits that a lot of times are on DeFi. And then there's just really trying to, you know, you have this evolving technology, evolving industry, and I hope that we can all kind of start to get a common understanding about where this industry should go, but also just have a common understanding of what DeFi means, what decentralization means. And so one of the great things about the TAC meeting was that we had sort of all these you know, different groups come in and present on kind of the landscape, but also I asked them to start with just the basic. What is DeFi? What is it supposed to be? And I'll tell you that there were a lot of congressional staffers either there or watching who are working in this space, and I wanted them to be able to hear that.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge sort of knowledge gap that still needs to be filled, and I think industry does have a big role to play in kind of stepping up and providing that sort of education function. But also, you know, one of the first things you mentioned there was about, you know, having that full transparency of transactions in DeFi, and that is really quite revolutionary. And often, so often the focus goes on to, well, but there's no person I can touch, and there's well, that's the question of the spectrum of decentralization, the question of governance. But some of the benefits from a regulator's perspective is having all of those transactions. And I think sometimes we look to the things that we don't have and don't necessarily focus on what opportunities there are from a regulatory RegTech perspective to actually better understand a market when you do have that transparency. I want to come back to cybersecurity in a moment, but first, if we could just kind of, this issue of privacy, this issue of digital identity, personal wallets, or what some people call unhosted wallets. I know this is something you've given some thought to. How are you really thinking about those issues?
Yeah, so, these issues are, when you talk about DeFi and crypto generally, but certainly in the DeFi space, this is the issue that's still very nascent, that really needs to evolve. But let me tell you, from a regulator standpoint, this issue, we got to get on fundamental same page that the foundation has to be to prevent illicit finance. All right, we have to prevent terrorist financing, sanctions evasion, money laundering. And so when you look at this, identity becomes really important. Who are you doing business with? But let me also say, it is not just from the regulator's perspective. A lot of your customers also don't want to be having their funds mixed with someone from North Korea or a terrorist group. And that includes individuals, like retail participants, but it also includes a lot of financial institutions who can't engage in a situation like that. And so when we look at anonymity, that is different than privacy. Those two are not the same things. We have long had a financial system that has provided a measure of financial privacy to people, where not everything may be on the blockchain, on a public blockchain, or not everything is sort of out there for you to see, what I paid for yesterday. But the difference between privacy and anonymity is the issue of data. And so the data in financial privacy is still taken. And in certain instances, in certain conditions, it can be disclosed, right? It can be discoverable, for example, a government agency who's doing an investigation, that sort of thing. And so one of the things we talked about in the tech meeting was just the importance of identity, and then this idea of the different technology that is evolving that would allow financial privacy, but still would have compliance with the law. And that becomes really important. And you've seen in some instances there were some technology that would not have that, and those are going to have there's going to be issues for the government. I mean, we've got to have a situation where we prevent this illicit finance. When you look at the unhosted wallets, the self-custody, whether you're going to do it through a mobile wallet or a browser or hardware or anything, you've still sort of got this issue, right? Where you've got to think about accountability, who's accountable, are those companies accountable? Who is accountable for that? So accountability, really, that thread is going to run throughout. And it's not just going to be regulators who are thinking about that, although we surely are. It's going to be customers too. And so it's something, as this industry grows and evolves, that we need to try to address in order to ensure that there's compliance with the law.
Yeah, and I think you're right to say that it's a space where the sort of technology solutions to these issues are still very much in a process of evolution. And there's also this question of, the interlinkages between, CeFi and DeFi, and how far away those different kind of elements are, and whether that provides sufficient comfort for these questions that regulators have. But I want to move on to sort of the cybersecurity risks. It's something we talked a lot yesterday here, and we had the head of security at Coinbase kind of, from that sort of centralized exchange perspective, talking about some of the challenges. It's something, of course, that Chainalysis, we do a lot of work looking at, cyber attacks in this space and the impact they're having on the industry. But from a regulator's perspective, how are you thinking about cybersecurity, and where do you think the industry could be doing more?
Yeah, so I've definitely got thoughts on that. Cybersecurity is one of my priorities, and that's more general through everything that we regulate, which includes some crypto. But let's talk about crypto for a second. So I think 2022 was an all-time high for hacks. So billions of dollars that were stolen. And remember, there's no recourse here. All right, customers are not getting that back. Companies are having to internalize that. So let's start with there's sort of the good basic cyber hygiene, because a lot of these, it might be complicated in how they exploited code or came in through the front door, but the idea of insider access, the idea of phishing, the idea of zero-day or end-day vulnerabilities where something wasn't patched, like the third-party service providers, these are still those are the top 3 threats in all financial services, and not just financial services, but healthcare and manufacturing. So those are still very much at play. When it comes to crypto, there's a couple things to be very focused on, because we just had a number of hacks, right? Ronin Bridge and Badger were some of them. Binance got hacked, I believe, this past summer. So let's look at those for a second. The key management becomes very important. So if you look at the Ronin Bridge attack, the attack came in, they were able to get 5 keys that were then able to take the money. So the governance issues on like what is happening, what are the controls around those private keys becomes very important. Cross-chain bridges, the bridges that sit between different blockchains. This is what happened with Binance. But it's happened with other companies too, and trying to find a way to shore up those cross-chain bridges become incredibly important. And then there's what's called man in the middle, which is, this is what happened with Badger, with the Badger attack, which is, you've got these sort of customer-facing software or platforms sitting on your platform, so that customers can come in and interact and put their funds in and all of that. And so with Badger, there was a customer-facing interface that was the source of the hack. And so that man-in-the-middle scenario has to be looked at. So those are all areas: the private key management, the cross-chain bridge, the man-in-the-middle. Those have been around for a bit, and so there's different companies working on solutions to that. And then there's sort of what could happen with exploits and smart contracts. And that's kind of what's coming down the road. But let me say this, because one of the things that was fascinating is we had a number of cyber experts present. And the message they had to everyone in the crypto industry was that it's not going to be sufficient to just manage cyber risks. You have to eliminate them.
Interesting.
Which, might be scary, but
Yeah.
the point is, like any little vulnerability, and they come in, and then it's all hacked, and people lose their money, the company loses their money, you lose your reputation, and that's going to be a real issue, and you could lose trust.
I want to perhaps touch on the elephant in the room, which is the relationship between the CFTC and the SEC. We often hear them painted as sort of an us or them, very binary context, but I know you've talked a lot, and I mean, your career shows, this sort of whole of government approach. You've managed to make the transition. We've also seen you in your current role, participating in fireside chats with some of the commissioners at the SEC. How does that sort of work in practice? And can you talk a little bit about, how, the importance of that dialogue and how it can be fostered a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'll say I was actually just texting a SEC commissioner right before I came on stage. So, we are all used to working together, and the dialogue is really important. It continues. It's not just for this industry. It's for everything that we do. TradFi is well used to the fact that there are multiple regulators. And so I do think this industry has to get used to the fact that there are multiple regulators. To the extent you want to come into the financial system, which you're already here, you do have to get used to multiple regulators and trying to figure out, you've got to talk to this one for this, you've got to talk to this one for that. We all work together. I mean, think about it this way. We all have the same client, the US government. And so we are all trying to work together through our specific mission, through our specific lens to make sure that we are coming together and all fulfilling our mission. When, if you look at, when you were talking about the fireside chats that I've done recently and for a while, with Commissioner Peirce and Commissioner Ueda, I've been friends with them for 16 years. We came up together at the SEC.
Yeah. And
right?
you don't suddenly stop being friends just because you're now...
No, no, I mean, it just continues. We're talking all the time. I'm friends with the other commissioners. I mean, we are, I will tell you that the reality between us is, and not just the SEC, but all of the financial regulators, and this includes state regulators, by the way. I'm thrilled to open for Adrian Harris today, who is just amazing on these issues. But when we meet and we talk, it's all very, very seriously like, this is a challenge. How do we address this challenge? What do we do about this issue? It's very real, substantive conversations, which honestly I think is what you want. It's the best of government, and that's. We respect each other. We respect each other's jurisdiction as well. We all try to work together to understand that. But we're all trying to get to the same place, and that's been my experience. And that reality may not sort of be reflected in news articles that you see, but that's the reality that I face every single day.
Yeah, there's a sort of much more pragmatic rather than sort of political approach, it sounds like, on the ground.
Well, we're all trying to, remember, this is a fairly new industry compared to the financial sector, and we are all trying to, move as quickly as we can to get to the right situation where we have a regulated industry where people are protected as customers, where there's guardrails and there's good market integrity. That doesn't come quickly usually, and at the same time, the industry is evolving very quickly. So we're all trying to sort of figure that out while the train is moving. Yeah. And honestly, that's where we spend our time talking about. How do we resolve this? How do we resolve that? What do you think about this? What just happened? And then the other thing is I just want to mention we work enforcement cases together. And so you've seen a number of cases where multiple agencies will bring a case, and I think you'll probably see more of those.
Yeah. Heard it here first. If you think about trying to build, I think everybody in this room wants to see the industry grow, but I think we want to see it grow as a safe ecosystem, so that kind of safe innovation, still at the cutting edge, but taking into account, the kind of things like consumer protection, financial stability that you've already mentioned. On your wish list, what's the most important thing that industry and regulators could be doing to get to that goal?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that regulators and industry could be doing to have responsible innovation that is in a safe financial system is to put customers first. Honestly, if you put customers first, if we put customers first, all else is going to flow from there. Right? I mean, when we look at putting customers first and what that means, that's going to help me decide from a policy perspective what to regulate, what to not regulate. It's going to cover a lot of areas, right? That's going to include cybersecurity. That's going to include sort of all these other customer protections. If the industry puts customers first, it's also going to resolve a lot of issues that have caused concern, right? There's not going to be commingling of company assets with customer assets. There's not going to be conflicts of interest where an affiliate's interest or a founder's interest is put ahead of customers. Risk is going to be managed You're going to do your anti-money laundering, your know your customer, because you don't want your customers to get in a bad situation where their money is mixed with a terrorist group. And so cyber. So all of these things will flow from putting customers first. And as I think about, when you said you were going to ask me this question, I thought, well, how do I pick one thing that is timeless, that allows for evolution in the industry and innovation in the industry? And that is a timeless North Star if you can put customers first.
Commissioner, you spoke earlier this year that this industry is in a crisis of trust. In our last sort of 10 seconds, anything that you'd like to leave us with? Because when we're back here in a year's time, everyone in this room wants to make sure that that's no longer the case. How do we get there?
Yeah, so I mean, you first have to understand that financial markets depend on trust. And this industry is not good in a trust position right now, with the public, with investors, with customers. Very simple things: governance, internal controls, resolving conflicts of interest. Gatekeepers better step it up. Where are the lawyers? Where are the accountants? Where all of that? Cybersecurity has got to get better. No commingling. It's the same things. I mean, you can almost sort of look at kind of what happened with FTX. I mean, this speech I gave was, it's a crisis of trust, but it's also lessons learned from FTX. But if you think about it, for a long time, at the very beginning, crypto was not something that had public trust. There was a lot of concerns about its use on the dark net, about its use for terrorist financing, that it was frauds and it was scammy. And then all of a sudden, decentralized exchanges came in, tried to build trust, public trust. And if you look at the most trusted place to put your money, it was things like that when you look at the commercials and all of that. So now it feels to many like a violation of trust. So first start to earn that trust back is to get away from that scammy terrorist financing, illicit finance, fraud, all of that. And then second thing is to tighten up and bring those controls in to make sure that there's cybersecurity, that there's good internal controls, good financials, and no conflicts of interest. And if you do that, not only will the industry build trust, but the customer protections will be coming in because you're going to put customers first. And then there's going to be market integrity guardrails, which I want. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate you being with us. Thanks, everybody.